Well, I'm really honored to be here. I visited this sanctuary for the first time on Sunday. I drove up to support Reverend Abigail in her talk, and I'm really inspired and impressed by the surroundings and the vibe, and all the people were so kind and friendly and welcoming, and what a beautiful sanctuary. It's really sweet. You're really, really blessed. Love it. I'm going to talk about change today, as Cindy said, and how to navigate through change at work. This could be in your own business, which obviously most of you have, or my experience is mostly corporate, but it all applies. It's all the same sort of approach. So look, let's be honest. Change stirs up resistance in most people. And usually, when something is shifting in our lives, whether it is business or personal, we have this tendency to hold on, to kind of stay where we're at. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is and what to do about it. The truth is, though, that growth really can't happen. Evolution cannot happen without change. They go hand in hand. So we're also going to talk a little bit about that, how to make that happen. So yeah, we tend to avoid it. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, "There is nothing permanent except change." And he also has a famous quote about the river: "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he is not the same man." So he was a Greek philosopher who really, his whole philosophy was based on the fact that the universe and nature is always changing. And it may seem strange to us now, but other philosophers at the time didn't agree with him. They sort of thought everything stayed the same. But he was very much steeped in this, I know, weird, huh? In this belief that everything is constantly changing. And the interesting thing about the quote about the river is, a river seems so constant. I think because it's part of nature. We know when we look at a river, it's been here for many, 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 many years, and it feels like a constant. And yet, if you just step 1 foot in it, you have changed the river. The course is a little bit different, and we're changed. Every time, every moment we're changed. We're different than we were last week by the experiences we had, by who we've met, who we've talked to. And there's a flow and a beauty to the fact that we're always changing, that there's a cycle of life, that there's a synchronicity. So I want to talk a little bit about this resistance. I mean, philosophers, as I just said about Heraclitus, remind us that there's always change. And some psychologists point out that it's really not the struggle with change itself, but we fear what we might lose due to the change. We fear the loss. Author Ronald Heifetz says, "What people resist is not change per se, but loss." When things shift, things feel uncertain. That can bring anxiety when we don't know what's coming. Especially, I mean, obviously we don't know what's coming, but when something is sort of in a pattern, we feel like, oh, this is, I go to this meeting every once a month on Wednesdays. There's a pattern, right? So at least we know what to expect. If there's a big shift in our lives, it can bring anxiety. What will this mean for me? What will it mean for my family? My business, my work. My personal story is that I was laid off in March from a job as chief of staff I'd had for 6 years. And this is the longest I have been without work in my whole life, since I was 15. And this was really scary for me. I'm the sole earner for my family, and I thought, well, I'll just get a job real quick, like I usually do. And it's been kind of challenging, and I've really had to look at, like, okay, well, why is this happening? Where is spirit in this? It's been quite an experience, and it's turning out to be an interesting and good experience, but it all, it made me really think about, how I felt when this big change happened for me. Cognitive scientist Dr. Maya Shankar says, "The reason we often have so much discomfort in the face of change is because it threatens our identity and sense of self. So our brain creates this image, this self-image that we make our decisions, that we have our insights and perspectives from, and it feels really natural and predictable. I know who I am, I know how I respond, and when a big change occurs, we kind of have to create a new model of ourselves sometimes. And And again, in my own life, I was asking myself, I've been an executive in the tech industry for years. Am I still as smart? Am I still as brilliant? Am I still as, just can I get a job and that sort of thing? Who am I? And really, I've been in science and mind, as Cindy said, for a very long time, and I know in my heart that my title is not who I am, and it just took spiritual practice for me to continue to remind myself of that I am not the title of the job that I've had, and that, of course, I am still the same person, and even better. So, it's important to remember that whenever something changes, something is released, and something new begins. Sometimes it feels like a change is being imposed on us or done to us, and we feel like our autonomy is being threatened. And we initiate many changes on our own. For instance, we might get married. That's a big change. It's something, it wasn't imposed on us, and usually it's a positive thing, I'm hoping. But it's still a big change, and something is released, that life that we had, and then something new is coming in. So it still takes taking a look at what is released and what is coming to us. Is there any such thing as a neutral change? Sure, class is on Tuesday instead of Wednesday. Doesn't have any impact. So there's changes that feel from the outside, from the inside, and just sort of neutral. Positive, negative, or neutral. So sometimes, with work, the outside could be the economy, the demographics, our customers change, vendors change. There's so many things that have to be dealt with. So that's when remembering spirit, I've been talking a lot about, okay, all these changes happen in our lives. That's when remembering spirit becomes really essential. Spirit never changes. It cannot change. It always has been. It always will be. And the changes that are occurring are the manifestation of spirit in its creations, which are all of the beings. But the core of spirit is spirit. And remembering that and returning to that, if we're feeling anxiety about change, is grounding and can help us get back on track to remember that all is well in my world, because spirit never changes. Ernest Holmes said, "The spirit of the universe cannot change. Being all, there is nothing for it to change into." And this is basically what I was saying. He goes on to say in the textbook that the manifestation of spirit, which are humans, nature, animals, everything, constantly change, allowing spirit to have its being by means of our evolution. I'm sure y'all know Brene Brown. She says, "Change is uncomfortable and hard as hell. When leaders expect others to change without participating, plus holding themselves accountable, it's almost impossible. When leaders show up and model the vulnerability required for transformation, it's often unstoppable." So I learned this lesson, probably one of the hardest assignments of my life, where this unchanging nature of spirit became more than just sort of an idea. It really became my compass. And I was working as head of production and operations at this Big Fish Games where I most recently worked, and I was promoted to chief of staff. And my first assignment was a doozy. I had to organize and implement a reduction in force, a layoff of 250 people. I know, terrible corporate stuff. It was really. It was obviously very emotional, and it was very, very important and vital. I focused on it for 3 months straight, this project. And my approach was that there was zero room for error in any detailed decision that we made. Communication, logistics, legalities, and finance, because this project would result in a challenge for hundreds of people, and they would be shocked, scared, angry. And we had this mandate from our parent company that we had to do this to survive, and I had a mandate to my team that I was working with that every single person impacted would be felt that they were treated with respect and dignity. Very important. And in this kind of a big change, I can't really stress enough the importance of methodical communication. I think it's the key to a change. And I'll get more into some specifics around that. But often, particularly in large companies, if there's a huge change with the company, let's say there's a new leader, a new president comes in, or we bought a company, or we sold our company, or this product's being discontinued, someone in the press, communications department will write something, and they'll just send it out to everybody, whatever level, whatever their job is. Or I've gotten an email at a company, just goes, we get an email. There's some big change happened, and there's no time to sort of react and respond. And so when you have a big change, it's very important to sort of what I call waterfall the communication. And I'll describe specifically what that is in a moment. But these details being checked and rechecked are super important. And this massive undertaking, every time a decision was made, and it could be it was during the pandemic, so it had to be on Zoom. So it's like, well, should we have the HR person give the information or the manager? How will that make the person feel? I just kept asking that. They were tired of it, but I don't care. Because really, every time it's like, well, how will that make the person feel? What will their impact be? They're going to be impacted, but how can we be respectful about that? So the feedback we received after this was from people that were laid off and the people that were retained, which also experience a very difficult time when there's a big layoff like this. It was the most professional and respectable layoff they had ever witnessed. Wow. And thanks. Thank you. It was really good work, and I applied this system, this process I came up with across other changes, some that were buying not necessarily a layoff, but ending a product or buying a company or selling a company within the companies. We always use this process. And what I embodied through the entire experience was spirit never changes, and that God is present in everyone, including the finance people that needed us to make this change, everyone that on the team that had to implement it, and all the people that were let go or retained. So one of the ways to acknowledge and celebrate change in general is through ritual. This tradition is really familiar to us outside of work. It can be a wedding or really simple, like a blessing when you move into a new home. According to Reverend Carol Huntley, author of Celebrate with Ritual, which I hope everyone has read that book, a ritual is a conscious act that represents something deeper than the act itself. It can be as simple as deliberately experiencing sunrise and knowing that on this particular day, it means a whole new beginning for you. It can be elaborate or as humble as you choose. As you participate in a ritual, you may begin to understand sacred principles as very personal, connecting you to all of life. So I do encourage you to bring ritual into your work life. It can be as simple as having, if you have colleagues or teammates, a 1 to 3 minute check-in every time you start a meeting. How are you? That kind of thing. In my last team, I always started my team meetings, I had weekly team meetings with an icebreaker, just like a question, usually something personal, not how's your project going, but something to help us bond and connect, and also a quick check-in. So that was a ritual for us. It was simple, but it really grounded us. When I have a big meeting or presentation, I always spend time alone, pray, really know that my audience can receive what I'm saying, that spirit is articulating through me, and that's a ritual for me to have a time alone and a prayer before I go into a big meeting. I also pray daily for my team all the time. So we had a term when I worked at Disney Studios. I was at Disney for 15 years down in Los Angeles. I worked in the video game department there. And we had this term called a change agent. And I learned so much at Disney about change. And this term, the change agent. At Disney, it wasn't a job title. It was like a role that people sort of naturally fell into. At Big Fish, we called them culture carriers, this kind of person. And it was recognized as someone who actively helped the company evolve, whether it was process or creativity, or it could be an organizational transformation. And it didn't matter what level. It wasn't, it could be someone who was entry level, it could be mid-level, didn't matter. It was really about how they showed up when there was a change, how they showed up at work. And it was important that it was authentic. It wasn't like, I've bought this story and I'm gonna sell it. It's people who could really easily see what was being released and what's coming and help people along. So I was considered a strong agent for change when I was there. And as a religious scientist, I applied 5 of our principles to the areas of being a change agent that I just want to share with you. So first is driving innovation and continuous improvement at Disney. The employees were encouraged to challenge the way we've always done it. And if it no longer served the guest experience at Disney, and by the way, guests aren't just at the parks. People who read books, go to movies, play video games, they're always called guests. They're not called customers at Disney. That's still true, and that was part of Walt's dream, was that, you're in my home kind of thing. And so yeah, if people said, well, this isn't serving us anymore and a change needed to happen, they would be a change agent, and they could advocate for better ways of doing things. So I associated that with the principle of creative mind, and that Spirit is always creating and always creating through us, and that we are, our mental equivalence is what brings that change about. And the specifics is our thoughts, beliefs, and intentions create our reality through a universal creative process. When we change our thinking, we can change our lives. The second area of change at Disney was balancing tradition with transformation. So, Disney puts a lot of energy into protecting its legacy and its characters and guest stories, things like that. But a change agent could respect that heritage, still guiding colleagues through new practices and technologies or shifts. So I thought that principle was wholeness. Each person is an expression of wholeness and perfection, even when life feels fragmented. At the spiritual level, nothing is broken or missing. And third is influencing without authority. So because it wasn't a formal title, you would need to influence people. You wouldn't necessarily be their manager or above them in the hierarchy, but be able to have an influence because of just who you were, your credibility, your collaboration. And so I aligned that with oneness. All life is interconnected. God's spirit or universal intelligence is present everywhere in everything. And as everyone, we are not separate from the divine, but expressions of it. And then fourth is modeling adaptability and positivity. As I said, everyone's a guest and it's a show business. So they kind of would set the stage for others if you were a change agent, help reduce fear, model optimism, and that principle is love. Love is the essence of God and the foundation of all creation. And then lastly, supporting any organizational initiatives that need change. So sometimes the company would roll out a formal initiative, and then the change agents would be these grassroots advocates to help with that. And I consider that principle the spiritual law, which is just as physical laws govern the material universe, spiritual laws govern the invisible realm. These laws are consistent, impersonal, and always at work. And this approach helped the company evolve gracefully, bridging between Walt's original vision and the future. The same blend of honoring tradition while embracing transformation isn't just for large corporations, but applies to small businesses as well. So I really did learn to embrace change while at Disney. And since then, every company I've worked for, I've helped usher in change. I've helped establish systems. And recently, a couple of years ago, our associate minister at Seattle, Reverend Abigail Shire, who spoke here on Sunday, reached out to me and asked me to meet with the staff to talk about setting up a change process within the Centers for Spiritual Living at Seattle. So I met with the staff and I kind of gave this talk, talked about what I had been through and what I had developed and how communication is so important, and went into a lot more detail about project managing a change. And in turn, they developed an internal robust process for change, which was used quite successfully recently. And I'm going to cover some of the elements of this at a high level because it's something you might want to think about in your business if you go through a change. I want you to know I have permission from Reverend Abigail to tell this story, so it's totally okay. And I wanted to talk about it because it's a really good review or look at combining spiritual principle with a solid process to elegantly complete a large organizational change at Seattle Centers for Spiritual Living. So Reverend Abigail made a decision to leave her position at CSL Seattle in order to pursue senior ministry, which was a longtime dream of hers. And what she expressed her desire for this was an elegant ending, which I love that phrase, an elegant ending. It really says a lot about how she wanted to be able to depart. She wanted to make sure no one heard about this through hearsay, and it really took careful and thoughtful planning from the team and the senior minister to make sure this happened. So she and her team developed this change process in 5 key areas. One was assessment. So in this real-life case study, Reverend Abigail went to her senior minister, said, I'm going to be departing, and so the assessment is, what's the change? What's happening here? What do we have to do? So they formed a committee and scheduled out exactly the steps needed to go from Abigail is working here to Abigail is not working here, and making sure as much as possible that anyone involved feels comfortable and feels like they've been brought along on the journey rather than something just being thrown at them. Communication. Big news is best communicated like a pyramid, so the leader finds out. In this case, the senior minister met with her direct reports. Then that includes staff ministers and people that worked in the office. Then all the practitioners had a special meeting. Then all the members. Then there was an email and a newsletter. If you can see it like a pyramid, the reason is that each level of person becomes a change agent for the next level. So if a member's like, oh my God, Reverend Abigail's leaving, a practitioner can say, oh yes, it's really exciting, and of course we're sad she's leaving, but she's just trying to follow her dream, and like they can help with that rather than just blasting information out at everybody and people are confused. And it really, it was done very well and very elegantly and beautifully. So, and you know, there's support. Like there were both Kathy Ann, the senior minister, and Abigail were available for questions anytime. There were 2 farewell meetings for Abigail so people could share gratitude and say goodbye. I mean, they really thought of everything that the community would need to allow this to happen in a really beautiful way for them and for her. And you know, once the organizational change was big, Abigail was a practitioner for the ministers. She led several teams. She ran the Thrive campaign, which is the fundraising every fall. And so there was a lot of things she was involved in that had to be transferred to somebody. And so all of that had to be planned out and scheduled. And they did a really nice and elegant job of doing that. So afterwards, there's a retrospective. CSL Seattle always reviews big projects afterwards and looks at what could be learned. So ultimately, she got her elegant ending, and the whole community was able to move through this with grace. So looking back, I realize all these moments in my life, in business, in ministry, has taught me the same lesson. Change is both profoundly practical and deeply spiritual. And I think CSL Seattle's framework is a great example of great principle meeting efficient process. Sometimes the simplest words bring it home best, like something my daughter Soph recently said to me in the kitchen. When I confront, I feel aligned with God. When I speak my truth with love, I stand in my higher consciousness. Their words remind me that confronting change is not just pragmatic, it's sacred. Thank you.